cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. By the way, this episode is also available as a video on our YouTube channel. Just search Energypreneurs. Thank you for joining.
Hi, Andrea. Good afternoon from Manila.
Hi from Melbourne.
Wow, wonderful. Melbourne must be cold, right?
It is. Today's freezing. It's not such a bad thing, but yeah, it's pretty cold.
Yes. So all the batteries that are full in homes are gradually started draining in some places, I get, if the heating load is very high, no?
True. I'm not sure what the battery optimization algorithms will be doing right now, honestly. That's a good point.
Yeah. So I'm expecting to learn a lot more about batteries. Maybe you tell us what you've been doing. Introduce yourself. It's a very exciting thing, batteries.
Sure. My name's Andrea La Nauze. I'm a researcher at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. I'm an energy and environmental economist. I mostly study behavior. So I'm interested in what makes people adopt green technologies, what happens to their behavior once they have adopted those technologies, and what are the implications of that behavior for the system in general, society, and society's well-being.
Wow. So what are the project that you are working on right now?
So one project I'm working on right now, batteries are a component of it. It's called a virtual energy network, and it's about trading the excess energy from rooftop solar panels among customers in the distribution network, basically among the community. So in Australia, where I am, we have a really high rate of rooftop solar adoption. So I think the latest is that 40% of dwellings in Australia have rooftop solar panels. Now, that might not be exactly right, but it's somewhere in that vicinity. So we have a huge amount of energy coming from within the distribution network. So during the day, obviously, particularly on sunny days, but even on cloudy days, they're still producing. And there are some parts of the distribution network where there's just too much of that energy during the middle of the day. And a virtual energy network is essentially, it's an accounting system that enables people to trade among themselves. So energy that I produce and export is deemed to be used by you somewhere else in the distribution network. It's a matching sort of algorithm. And the reason why that's so interesting is not because of the physics of necessarily where the energy is being produced or consumed, but more that it enables a different set of incentives to be delivered to consumers all through the distribution network. So again, in Australia, for those who aren't aware, the way that owners of rooftop solar get compensated for their excess energy is they get paid a feed-in tariff that is very low relative to what they pay to import electricity. As an example, they could be paying, say, 25 to 30 cents to buy electricity from the grid, and then they get paid 3 cents, 2 cents, 5 cents for anything that they sell. So that means if you have rooftop solar, you have a huge incentive to consume when your panels are producing, right? Because your effective opportunity cost is very low and a huge incentive to load shift and consume more during the day. But if you don't have panels right now in Australia, most people don't face any incentive to use more during the day. So even though we have this huge excess availability in the middle of the day, prices have not really moved to match that excess supply. So in the virtual energy network, by opening up this resource to people in the distribution network who don't have rooftop solar, we're hoping to see whether access to cheap power for those who don't currently have it results in a big change in consumption during the middle of the day. Now, that's important from an efficiency perspective because we don't want to see power go to waste. But beyond that, if we're able to demonstrate that there is this flexibility in the distribution network, then that suggests that we can actually have more solar than we already do. So in many parts of Australia, there's actually restrictions on you cannot install any more panels in certain locations because there's just too much. But if we can absorb more of it locally, then we'll be able to relieve some of those constraints. And that's good news for everybody.
Yeah. Where are you in Melbourne right now?
I'm in the northeastern suburbs, the Burwood campus, which is in the east of Melbourne.
I have a house in Doncaster East, and I'm just looking, you're right. And in my situation, all of the solar right now, half is going to back to the grid.
Hmm.
Rest is going to the consumption because I have a power wall which is full. So you
Yeah.
are saying now I'm selling back. I forgot what feed-in tariff I get, say 5 cents. Whereas maybe my neighbor who doesn't have a solar is importing at 25 cents. So this is 20 cents per value in a way by trading the neighbors between, right?
So almost, at least in the current retail market in Australia, it's not going to quite be that 20-cent difference
Yep.
because your neighbor who's consuming still has to pay for the poles and wires. So the way that typically you think about the price of electricity that you import, there's the energy component of it, there's the paying for the poles and wires, and then there's paying for other kind of add-ons. And so this system, the virtual energy network, would just make that energy component tradable. So rather than your retailer buying from the wholesale market for you, they're just enabling you to trade directly with your neighbor. So your neighbor would get a discount depending on what you negotiated with them. So if you said, look, I'm willing to sell it to you at 8 cents, so you're making 3 more cents. And let's say their costs for network usage were 12 cents, then they're going to be paying 20 instead of 25, and you're going to be getting 8 instead of 5.
Yeah, other option would be I have a fully charged car or a battery, 100 kilowatt hour. He said, okay, I'll park my car in your car park. And if it's a bi-directional charging, I'll collect $20 at the end of the day, no?
Yeah, really interesting use case for the virtual energy network is people who have electric cars. They're set up at home with rooftop PV, but then they drive to work.
Yep.
They drive to work and they can't charge cheaply at work because the PV is at home. But if they can essentially send their cheap energy to themselves at work, for example, if they have a small business, now they can effectively make the most of that cheap power by charging their vehicle. So there's a whole range of possibilities that the virtual energy network is set up to enable.
So it's more like a financial transactions. So electrons don't follow. So it's like a two-way hedge that the wholesale electricity markets a many regime, right? If I put out this much, I'll take it out from the system, but it goes into the system, but I have a financial sort of instrument whereby kilowatt hour supplied to the grid gets counted, kilowatt hour taken out gets counted, and the two different prices, right?
Yeah, so I guess the physics is separate to the accounting is the point. And in the virtual energy network, there's no representation of the physical system. You can imagine in a distribution network, there are elements of the distribution network that can't receive or send any more power than they already are. But that's not a constraint that's represented in the virtual energy network. And similarly, in the current environment within Australia, you pay the same amount for the poles and wires, no matter whether the kind of your trading partner is next door, as in the example you gave us, or your trading partner is in Queensland, thousands and thousands of kilometers away. That charge is the same. And that's part of the regulatory setup in Australia. So one thing people say, okay, why is what you're doing important? I think if we can demonstrate that using prices has this big impact on consumption in the middle of the day, then we might also want to rethink network tariffs. So the design of the tariffs, of the charges for the poles and wires. Why might that be the case? Because we really want to reward people for consuming at times when there's local resource availability if we have these constraints. So if the distribution network is constrained, we want to try and match consumption to production locally as much as we can, really. And that potentially reduces strain on the distribution network, which hopefully will lead to pushing out the time at which we need to upgrade that network So that has cost savings. Delaying that investment to upgrade has cost savings, and then those cost savings are beneficial for everyone.
Amazing. So much more can be sort of, I'm just thinking loud here. So you are now talking about cent per kilowatt hour versus cent per kilowatt hour, right? There could be also the capacity component, right? Because you can provide a capacity and reduce the spinning reserve in a way, right?
Yeah. So I guess now we're getting into sort of virtual power plant world and the virtual energy network. So the software that I'm studying effectively in my current trial, it's software by the clean tech startup in Australia. It's called Power Tracer. Now that can act, or there is a facility to act as a virtual power plant type arrangement within their setup. The trial that I'm leading, which we're recruiting for right now. So if you're in Australia and you have a smart meter, please Google Virtual Energy Network Deakin University and sign up to join the trial. We are just looking at this excess trade between households and small businesses. We're not looking at interactions with the wholesale price. Amber, the electricity company, gives you exposure to that wholesale price. We're also not opening up or interested in trade with other markets. So, for example, ancillary services, other markets that you might be able to access via a virtual power plant type trial. We're purely interested in the trade. And I guess we started the conversation talking about batteries. And in some ways, batteries are complements to the virtual energy network. And in some ways, they're substitutes, right? I guess the one reason we want batteries is to soak up a lot of this excess that's not being used in the middle of the day. On the other hand, if we just can use prices to soak that up instead of infrastructure, then that's a cheaper way of proceeding, right? If we can not install a battery or again, delay the installation of a battery by 5 to 10 years, that's valuable. And if prices can get us there, then that's a pretty cheap option.
Can you explain a bit more? Like if I have excess 5 kilowatt hour sitting there and the system won't take it, so how will that constraint be removed by me having partner or a financial contract with someone in Queensland?
In the trial of the virtual energy network, even if you are effectively able to sell that to someone in your neighborhood, will not relieve that constraint. I guess the hope is that if we can demonstrate that prices are effective at relieving these distribution issues, then that kind of is part of a case to be made that we shouldn't be using these pretty heavy-handed restrictions. We can use other methods to manage some of the issues.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Okay. Because the batteries play a very interesting role. We are working on a project concept in 2 countries, both in the Philippines and in Bangladesh. If we put 10 buses with V2G capability, and if they can do 10 kilowatt release, so suddenly you have a 1 megawatt power station. All you have to tell them saying, okay, 7 p.m. by 7 p.m., you line up with half or full battery charge so that at least they can discharge back. If the infrastructure provides that, then suddenly on a periodic basis, it can take hour or 2 of the evening peak load that comes from lighting as people get home, right? That's a way cheaper option than either disconnecting them or building other network or even put a battery sort of in the embed in the grid. But you are saying, even we can do better in certain cases through financial transactions, maybe. No, but you still need batteries if you do load shift, no?
To some extent, it reduces the reliance on batteries, right? If we, instead of soaking up solar into a battery and using it later at peak or overnight, if we just shift that load to the middle of the day, we don't need as much storage. We certainly need storage, and batteries provide a lot of other functionality that purely shifting consumption doesn't. We're talking about some of the power system benefits of certain technology. It's certainly not to suggest that batteries aren't very important, but we will need a lot of them. They're becoming cheaper, but if we can, again, delay the need for those batteries or reduce the number that we require, then that's going to be valuable as well.
Yeah. So do you have some numbers about the batteries in Melbourne, how many getting installed? Because these numbers will dramatically change with this huge subsidy that the federal government is providing, no?
I don't have numbers. I would love to see those numbers. And I have all sorts of ideas for how to design a research project to look at the impacts of the subsidies, because it's not a straightforward thing to do to figure out what is the impact of a subsidy on uptake. So, it's not enough just to look at before and after, for example. There's a trend, right? And some people would have purchased the battery even without the subsidy. And so we want to understand how much extra storage did we get from this subsidy, not just how many batteries are going in. So that's the kind of, we call it a causal inference problem in my profession. And we have models that enable us to try and understand what the causal impact of that subsidy is on uptake. So yeah, I would absolutely love to get my hands on that adoption data, but I don't have it, unfortunately. I have had, I think, and you've brought it up several times, V2G is the other sort of complicating factor or exciting possibility, or however you want to describe it. But I know a lot of people are quite confused about whether they have PV, they're thinking about getting an electric vehicle. Should they get a battery or should they get an electric vehicle? Should they get both? It's quite an exciting and complicated time to be an energy consumer.
Yes, absolutely. And then, of course, exactly as you mentioned, government puts a policy up. There will be freeloaders, meaning they were planning to buy anyway and then got this money for no reason.
Or they even delayed once
Yeah.
the announcement's made. Then people
Yeah.
are like, I was going to do it anyway. I'm just going to wait. And of course, it makes perfect sense. It's completely rational. Why shouldn't you get the subsidy like everybody else? But that doesn't tell us, again, what is the additional storage that we get because of this subsidy.
How do you see like a typical home in Australia right now? As you mentioned, 40% have rooftop solar. We have 1.4 kilowatt on an average rooftop solar, I think, per capita, which is the highest in the world right now. And then battery is slowly trickling in. Electric vehicles also slowly trickling in. Say 5 years out, 2030, you have any vision as to where batteries and others might be in people's life, in the homes?
In 2030, it's not that far away.
It's not far.
Not far at all. Australia has been a bit slower to adopt electric vehicles than a lot of other countries. I think there are plenty of reasons for that. Vehicles tend to be a bit more expensive in Australia anyway, for example, compared to the US. I know a lot of people would say it's because we haven't had any kind of standards like energy efficiency or environmental standards for new vehicles, and that may well play a role. Again, that's a question I would love to evaluate with some data rather than just making claims. So yeah, I think we will see a lot of both. I think we'll see obviously a lot of home storage. You've got a power wall. We'll see a lot of that type of storage. And we'll also see a lot of electric vehicle adoption, particularly among those people who have PV. So the feed-in tariffs that people are receiving are going down. The incentive, the effective cost of driving with an electric vehicle in Australia is just becoming ridiculously cheap if you have rooftop PV. So I think that will only continue.
And that will have a huge impact in the society when suddenly sort of transport costs, moving things, goods, yourself from A to B is zero, right? Almost zero.
Yeah, I think from a society perspective, sure, the energy cost may be very little, but the congestion cost may actually start to become more of a problem in that if it does cost very little in fuel, I'm more likely to drive than I otherwise was. And so we might start to need congestion pricing. So another way of managing an issue of demand versus supply. Of course, I'm an economist. So yeah, we might start to have other problems. I think there's huge advantages in terms of local air quality from electric vehicles with no tailpipe emissions, but I think there are still some issues with air quality coming from a lot of driving. So my understanding is that even just the rubber of the wheels is actually can cause some air quality problems. So I also do some research in air quality. So that's another area that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, but I'm not sure about the congestion issue, because if you listen to I forgot the gentleman's name. So there are a lot of theories out there, especially because of self-driving, autonomous driving cars, the car ownership will go down. So right now, one car serves, I think, less than an hour on an average, whereby if your car could go and do other things, especially what Tesla's robotaxi pilot is doing. So if everybody adopts that, maybe congestion will be less, meaning there will be less car ownership in general. People should go elsewhere. Not everybody has to go to the CBD, no? Yeah, Tony Seba is the name, Tony Seba.
We do
Yeah.
have a system where people want to do the same things at the same time. And so I guess until we have a better way of managing people and their time, we will continue to have times of constraint and times where constraints don't bind. But if we all need to go and pick up our kids at 3:30, we're going to be utilizing all of our autonomous vehicles to do that. And if we can't get one to get the kid at 3:30, speaking from experience, then that's definitely a big problem.
Absolutely. Now, coming back to the first word that you said, that you study behavior of people, how they adopt on technology, I'm still internalizing that concept, because that is the key, right? You may have the best technology, you may have everything. If people do not use them, if people don't adopt them, what's the point? Addressing climate change, electric vehicles, the fuel cost is maybe 1/5, but how many people actually understands until and unless they have driven a car?
Yeah, exactly. So, I guess some of the things I study are what happens when you give people different types of information on the products that they're about to buy. And I have a recent paper actually that just got accepted in an international peer-reviewed journal, where we actually look at who is it that's seeking out information on energy efficiency, for example. So if you think about appliances, there's a lot of information on the energy efficiency of, say, different fridges. Some people seek out that information and other people completely ignore it, even when it's right in front of them and it's available to them for free. Now, the people who seek out that information, our study actually shows they were already buying the efficient model. So even if they didn't see the information, they were already buying efficiently. It's the people who aren't interested in the information, who don't pay attention to it at all, when you force it on them, or in our case, when you pay them to look at it. So we actually paid people to look at the information. That's when it actually has an impact. So again, just saying informed consumers buy energy efficient products does not mean we should have a policy of just providing information, because the people who need to get it are not taking it up.
How do you pay people to read?
We paid them to view the information. This is an experiment, right? So it's a bit of an artificial environment, but it's incentivized. So we paid people to view information, and then we asked them, they only got the payment if they answered a question correctly. So we knew that they had internalized some part of the information, because basically we got them to make a purchase. So they got a budget. They made the purchase decision when they didn't have any information. Then we offered them information and we paid some of them to take the information. And then we got them to make their choice again. And so that's how we know what impact the information had on different people's choices. And that's also how we know that the people who naturally seek out the information in the first place are already buying the most efficient model. So for them, it might be nice to know it's confirmation, but it had no impact on their choice whatsoever. It's only the people that we really had to pay them to take it on board where the information actually makes a difference.
Many years ago, I was involved in a demand management work with the State Electricity Commission of Victoria, where I used to work, and introducing efficient hot water units. I think it's early 90s or late 80s. So then the idea was that if this is recommended, the plumber who installs gets $50. Because you know that they influence the decision as to, because people said, I just need a hot water unit.
Just do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the
And
guy
I
who's
think,
making the
yeah,
decision getting a discount, and for him or her.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And I think we're at a similar stage where maybe since that period of time, efficiency has come to mean something new, heat pumps, etc. But we
Mhm.
still face the same challenges of how do you encourage adoption among the people who otherwise aren't making an efficient choice.
I did an energy efficiency project. I won't say the country now because I'm going to say the bad word, because I got the project through just by embarrassing political leaders all the way up. And they say, why should minister wants to know, why should the head of state want to know about energy efficient? I said, do you know what's the wattage of your television? Because that's what I used to ask, saying, if you have
Yes.
an old television that your grandma is using could be 350, 450 watt. And on those days, if you have a super duper LED hadn't come yet, LCD, it could be 40 watt. I don't care. Yeah, you do. If you replace 1 million of those, that's 300 megawatt.
Yes.
And they said, okay, what do I have to sign? Let's move on the project. That's what I got the project through just by embarrassing people, saying, if you don't know what hope we have.
Yeah. People talk about these problems of kind of information and awareness in energy, both in terms of, yeah, what is the wattage of your appliances, but also what is your marginal electricity price? How much do you pay per unit? People have no idea. What is a kilowatt hour? How does something called a watt translate into what's on my bill? And I think that people are not understanding either of those dimensions.
Yeah, no, I use one example, which actually works quite nicely. I said, okay, if you get into a treadmill and work really hard, that about 100 watt. And if you do that for 10 hours, that's 1 kilowatt hour. But if you come back and run an inefficient air conditioner for 15 minutes, that 1 kilowatt hour is gone. Then you put that 1 kilowatt hour in your car and you can go up to 15 kilometers. So what I was saying, that someone running at 100 watt for 10 hours get 1 kilowatt hour. If you put into air con, that vanishes within 15 minutes. But if you put that into a car, which takes about 14 kilowatt hour to do 100, so you get about 7 kilometer of car ride. So this is how, what is 1 kilowatt hour is. And if you iron couple of shirts, you are very slow, that's already 1 kilowatt hour gone. And it cost about 5 to 10 cents.
Maybe we should run an experiment with the treadmill version of energy efficiency information.
It is hard. I actually posted on my YouTube channel many years ago. Me and one of our colleagues, we are in Europe somewhere, Copenhagen, and then there was a test. So I said, okay, we're so tired. Let's see. Two of us could not make it to 100. We are biking. It is hard work. The end of the day when you've been walking whole day. So people don't appreciate that is simply an old light bulb, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, Andrea, what else you do for fun rather than working on battery all the time?
I am very lucky that I really do enjoy my job and I do find it fun. Not all the time, of course, but I do find that fun. We just, speaking of electricity consumption, our heating bill this winter is going to be through the roof because we just got a new puppy and she's a whippet. And so she gets very cold. And so our heating is on all the time for the brand new puppy. I haven't seen our bill yet, but yeah, I don't know if I necessarily want to. But yeah, I have a young child, primary school age child, so she eats up all of my additional leisure time.
Wonderful. Okay, good. So what you tell also someone, a lot of people are interested to get into the battery field, and most people are technical. So you said you're an economist, you're looking at the behavior side of it. Is that an area you think a lot of people should get in? Because important is people need to adopt this technology, otherwise technologies don't make sense, no? What you tell them?
Yeah, look, I think mostly what I do is statistics, right? It's analytics and it's statistics. And I think another part of the energy revolution is the data revolution. And there's just so much data that can be analyzed and understood and used to improve the way we do everything that those kind of data analytics skills are hugely valuable in the world of energy and energy innovation. I never really enjoyed technical subjects like physics, but I really enjoyed statistics. And so combining statistics with thinking about people's behavior, I think, is really fruitful.
What actually makes people to change behavior, especially on the energy space? It is just numbers, feeling guilty, or what?
Yeah, I think a range of things. Obviously, the bottom line is a very powerful factor. And I think then we've been talking about a range of barriers, right? Where the bottom line, the incentives exist, but they're just not getting through. So some of those might be information failures, we would call them in economics, or they might be behavioral failures, not understanding that an electric vehicle might cost you more upfront, but over its lifetime, it's actually going to pay itself back relative to an internal combustion engine. So that cognitive side of decision making that isn't, I guess, operating as smoothly as our economics models might assume that it is. I think another thing is that I've studied and is very important are just social norms and the influence of your neighbors and your peers. So peers have a big impact on your choices, either for better and for worse. And that's another reason why it might be a good idea for governments to continue to subsidize, because for every one person who adopts, say, an EV, we get the influence of that person on a set of other people, right? And so their investment is kind of benefiting society more than just that one EV, because they're influencing somebody else as well.
Okay, that's actually a very good, sort of good point. Then
We call that a spillover, like a positive spillover. And the same kind of thing exists in research and development. There's a lot of positive spillovers in research and development.
yeah, and I think it's seeing is believing, touching is believing. I have a Model Y in Sydney. I think my wife had an old Ford. She touched that car. It's your car for almost 3 months. And once she started driving a few times, she said, "No, you can have the Ford." Because it's also initially she was okay. I've never driven one. I've ridden one, but how does it work? It doesn't have any gears and blah blah blah. But once you do it, say, no, okay, you can have the old car. This is pretty good. So I think that also the influence factor coming in, people trying things.
Yeah, and just the norm that this is just a normal thing to do. And some people want to be the early adopter sort of person, and other people don't. They don't want to stand out from the crowd. And so social norms can just be powerful for that reason. Yeah.
I'm an early adopter in most things, but I'm just thinking sometimes that how do you expand that bandwidth? How can you make other people early adopters? Of course, they have a curiosity factor. They want to do things and others, but from the behavioral science perspective, is that something that can be induced?
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember on your electricity bill, there used to be these comparisons on the electricity bill comparing you to your neighbors. The reason they exist is because there's a lot of very good science behind the impacts of that type of information, that it actually does have a big impact. It's not a big impact, but as you say before, a small impact over a lot of people turns out to be a big impact. So yeah, there's a lot of work showing that kind of information is very influential and also very cheap, right? So if you're interested in sort of cheap interventions, those nudges, as they're called, can be very effective, but there's a limit. The papers that I'm aware of, the studies, if you're talking about, say, aggregate electricity consumption, you might save between 2 and 8% or something like that, but you're not going to get much further than that. So a lot of these kind of quick fix, low hanging fruit, they're effective and they're relatively straightforward, but they have an upper bound that's pretty low, in fact. That suggests that they're not sufficient. We need plenty of other ways of encouraging people to adopt technologies or change their behavior other than just simple nudges.
Yeah, and also I think another complicated factor that has come in now, misinformation and wrong information. So what is correct? Because I remember driving through rural Victoria beyond Lake's entrance, I think Cane River or something. We are charging my EV with a sort of charger, and I'm waiting there. And then three ladies turn up and said, "This is an electric car." I said, "Yes." "How many kilometers?" And she asked, this group asked me 10 different questions, and they were giving me the answer. That's the bit that sort of intrigued me. I heard it is so much more efficient than this. Really? How? They were just confirming that
Yeah.
because I am a driver, so obviously I should know more.
And that might be one reason why we see these sort of neighbor to neighbor effects, because you trust your neighbor, right? And you can talk to your neighbor in depth about their experience, whereas just seeing an ad or something from someone who has an agenda, I think we're naturally skeptical. So the influence of peers is different to the influence of, say, government. I think they both have a very important role to play, but they're going to have a different effect for sure.
Yeah, then what the government should do, like an EV subsidy or a battery subsidy, that you get X dollars if you are, but if you can get 10 people in your neighborhood, you get extra 5%. So that you as a neighbor saying, "Might do you want to come along? If you come along, we all get discount," something like a club.
Yeah, been a lot of those bulk buy schemes in various parts of Australia. I think the rationale for them has just been, let's be a big player and get a big discount. But I think you're absolutely right that there's definitely a spillover effect of that as well. It's not just you get it cheaper, but also we're doing this together and we're all influencing each other for sure.
Yeah, because then that individual becomes a mouthpiece. We ran a very simple thing when I was working for Asian Development Bank. So I talked to one of the lighting manufacturers saying, "Listen, we have a clean energy week coming up. Can you give LED at a super discount?" They said, "Oh, if we give you a wholesale rate, that's already 40% discount." So I said, "Okay, let's sell them in the blocks of 10 because transaction, I wanted to sell 3,000 in a single day or 4,000, I forgot." It was amazing. Like people were become an agent, say, "Hey, I need 4. Will you take 4? It's within the office. Okay, I'll go downstairs and buy 10. It so quickly it went out because people knows me. I was the energy person. People are asking me, but out of like a 2,000 staff or 3,000 staff in the building, only maybe 50 people who are working in energy. Others have no clue.
Yeah.
But then everybody become a sub agent because everyone understand this LED normally cost X. Now it is 40% discount, but I have to buy in tens. Anyway, is there anything else you want to share that I did not ask?
No, I didn't think so. Yeah, I love talking to people working in the industry or consumers about their own journeys. And I'm always open to if anybody has exciting data or wants to talk about research projects and how to build good evaluation into programs and policy, then yeah, they should reach out. I'd love to chat.
Wonderful. So talking about data, what could be a potentially single source of lot of those data that you use, you will recommend people to go and find out about consumer data?
I guess it depends what people are interested in. In Australia, the Australian Energy Market Operator has reams of data of all sorts. I think there's really good data that on the penetration of rooftop solar in Australia. That's, I think, a really great publicly available resource. I'm not sure to what extent the federal government will publicize information on its battery subsidy uptake. Hopefully, they also do that. But yeah, sometimes data can be hard to get your hands on, particularly in Australia, because we have a privatized electricity retail system. Somebody owns that data and you have to convince them to give it to you. But often there are interested parties or tech startups who see the value of collaborating with researchers.
And what about batteries? The battery related, I know there was a setup in Canberra many years ago. They did a lot of testing on batteries, performance and others. Is there any specific areas where people can get information about batteries?
Yeah, look, that's not my area of expertise, the sort of technical side of things. I'm sure that there are some great guides out there. I think I was listening to a Solar Insiders podcast recently about what to look out for in terms of batteries. But yeah, that's really not my area of expertise.
Okay, no worries. Thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you.
Great to meet you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs.
If you enjoy this, don't forget the full video is on YouTube. Just search Energypreneurs.
Thank you. See you next time.